Hey everybody, I'm Stephen Colbert. Welcome back. I'm sure you enjoyed The Return of the King. Let's welcome back our panel, Ian McKellen, Andy Serkis, and Peter Jackson. Hi guys, thanks so much for being here. I'm so happy to see all three of you again. I've had a chance to talk to you individually in the past, but never together. And I've got a few questions generally about the films for all of you, and a few individual questions for each of you. The first one is 20 years on, this is the 20th anniversary of the release of the first film. It is recognized as a masterpiece of both critical and commercial success, changed what was expected, I think, of movies in terms of their ambition, their spectacle, the time they took to tell a story. We have all that perspective now. Going into it, what did you think you were getting into? Let's start with you, Peter. What did you think you were going to be making?
It's a good question because you have a sort of an image in your mind. I mean, we'd written the scripts, obviously, and so during the script writing process, you imagine the movie. I mean, you're writing the scenes and you imagine how they might be shot. But then once you have actors joining the team, they bring their own. They end up owning the characters. I mean, during the script writing process, the characters are all in our heads and we're imagining everybody's voices and everything. But once you have the cast joining the team, then you can let all that go and let the actors take control of their characters. And so that's when the surprises start to happen. And so the great thing is it's evolving. I mean, what was I imagining? Originally, I was imagining a fantasy movie of the type that I loved growing up, Jason and the Argonauts, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. Not exactly like that, but that's the reason why I got the idea of doing these films, was that I loved those films when I was young. And I realized that fantasy is a genre at that time that hadn't really been done very well, and I just thought that if we could take these books and make them as great as the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, then we'd be doing something pretty good. That was what I hoped.
Did the ambition, because it's an enormously ambitious work in its final execution, did that ambition grow as you approached it, or did it diminish based upon what was possible and what's not? Professor Tolkien actually said in his foreword, the tale grew in the telling. Did the movie grow in the making?
Yeah, it certainly did, in the sense that in the literal sense that even while we were shooting the movie, Philippa and Fran, more so than me, I had a day job that I was busy directing, but there'd be new scenes written even while we were shooting. So we'd written the scripts, we'd cast the film, we'd designed it, we were starting to shoot, the studio were on board, and yet we were still writing scenes. We didn't stop. It didn't mean that the script was frozen in time. We were constantly evolving it throughout the 3 or 4 years that we were shooting these three movies. So yeah, it did grow in the telling. I mean, the scene in the Two Towers, Andy's scene of the Gollum and Schmeagol talking, was a scene that never existed in the original script. I mean, that was written literally during the making of the film and shot by Fran. So a lot of we wrote on the fly. You write a script, you get the green light, but that you can't say the script's perfect, so you keep writing all the way through the shoot. So we were just writing on the fly the whole time. So certainly it grew, yeah.
Well, what about the actors? As Peter says, the actors make the characters their own, and they bring all the surprises. Ian, what did you think you were getting into? How did it start? Like, how did Peter approach you to do this part?
By telephone, I think, and then I had to remember Peter to say I'd love to do it, but then I couldn't because I had to complete another movie. Everything was arranged.
You almost didn't get to do it, Ian, because our first meeting in London, when we came round to visit you in the house, Fran and I came down, we hammered on the door, nobody answered, hammered again, nobody answered. And we literally thought, well, this isn't going to happen. Ian's not at home like we thought he was.
Or he's hiding.
And we'd started to walk down the street to get the cab to go to our hotel, and the door opened, and you went, "Oh, come back! Sorry, I was on the phone." And so I mean, that's how close it came to you not getting the role.
I'd forgotten that. As I remember, you came to my house and sat in a room just above where I am now, and you weren't wearing any shoes. I thought, hi, this is on. I hadn't read Lord of the Rings, Stephen, can you believe it? And so it wasn't a great thrill to be asked to play Gandalf. It wasn't until I rapidly read the book and realised that it was the part of a lifetime. And when I got to New Zealand, Peter still wasn't wearing any shoes. It's the New Zealand way. But I had the impression I'd got involved in a home movie. I mean, everybody seemed to know everybody and be friends with each other. Not always the case on a movie set, I must say. And we were filming in an old paint factory, you know, right back next to the international airport in Wellington. And do you remember, Peter, you had to have an assistant out in the all-weathers on a walkie-talkie telling you that a plane was about to land or a plane was about to take off, and we shot in between the time schedule of the airlines.
Somebody sitting on a deck chair on top of the hill overlooking the airport, who would say, "No, there's a plane approaching. It's going to land in about 3 minutes." We say, "Well, how long is this shot?" "Well, 3 minutes. We just wait till it lands." And we every time we were ready to roll the camera, we had to check on what the planes were doing. Yeah.
But we did. Peter and I both kept a public diary separately about the shooting of the film. The internet had only just been invented, and we were rather pioneers, weren't we, in this sort of communication.
So you were blogging. You were blogging your days.
Blogging, exactly. And I realised then that my ignorance was not shared around the world. There were millions of people, some of whom contacted us and said, "What are you going to do? Are you going to make the movie exactly like the books?" And they meant exactly like what they thought of the books. And I had to keep saying, no, it's Peter Jackson's movie, but you can trust him. But it was wonderful to know that so many people actually wanted the film to be made. That's not always the case when you're making a movie. You wonder, is anyone going to ever see it? So there's a certain sense of responsibility, but as an outsider coming into that wonderful family about whom I'm still very fond and affectionate, we were just accepted and embraced, and then discovering this the wonderful country of New Zealand. I mean, in every aspect, it was like one long real holiday, plus doing a bit of very, very, very pleasurable work.
Well, Andy, what about you? What was your first approach to this? How did Peter approach you about this, and what did you think you were getting into? Because, you know, as unusual as any of these roles are, yours might be the most unusual.
Well, yeah, I mean that was the thing. You know, when I was first, you know, I first got the call from my agent saying, "Look, this film is happening down in New Zealand, Lord of the Rings, and they're looking for someone to do a voice for a digital character." And I was like, "Lord of the Rings? Hold on a minute. Lord of the Rings must have loads of great characters in it. I don't want to do a voice for a digital character. Well, I can't see the joy in that at all. You know, I'm not a voice actor. I'm an actor, and you know." And so anyway, then it was explained that it was Gollum. Then it was just like, "Oh my God, Gollum! Well, that's a great role." I mean, I've read The Hobbit again, like Ian. I hadn't actually read Lord of the Rings,
Wait, so did you say you hadn't read The Lord of the Rings, but you had read The Hobbit?
No, I'd read The Hobbit, and I loved The Hobbit as a kid. I was massively into The Hobbit when I was a kid, but I hadn't actually read Lord of the Rings. And then I met people. Well, then I auditioned, which was kind of going in, and I did a sort of version of Gollum, a kind of rough version of that, which was, you know, as I've said probably many times in interviews, that based on my cat coughing up furballs. That's absolutely true. And then I met Peter and Fran, and Pete, you know, then explained sort of the real nature of what he was after, which was to have an actor on set be the character, and although finally it would be manifested as, you know, as a CG character, because you could never really cast someone that emaciated and to look like the way that Pete wanted and Fran wanted it to look. So that was kind of, once that was explained, that the acting process, and then it just grew. I mean, look, I arrived in New Zealand. I was one of the last to arrive in a way. And I'd been working on the character, and and then my first scene was seeing sort of somewhere up in the 600s, kind of, as classic filmmaking. You turn up, and it was in the third movie, climbing up towards Mordor and attacking Sam and Frodo as they're about to, the end of the movie basically. And I just remember crawling around on some rocks in a leotard, and Pete just laughing really, and just laughing at me and kind of giggling away and wondering what the hell I was doing. And I suppose at Pete, at some point, you just thought that it was worth filming.
Well, it's certainly true that we, in our minds, because motion capture back then it had been invented, and we didn't invent it, but performance capture, but it wasn't really, used. It was, and our visual effects company was young and figuring how to do things anyway, and so we thought that Andy would do the voice of an animated character. Then we realised that having Andy on set, just performing the character, would be a great guide for the animators, and also for the other cast on set, so they'd have somebody to look at rather than looking at a tennis ball on a stick like Ian had to many times. Sean and Elijah would get to look at Andy, and then we sort of came to the whole concept of motion capture slowly sort of seeped into the process, but only after we started filming. We were shooting Andy in a flesh-coloured leotard as a lighting reference, because we thought when we replaced Andy with the animated character, the flesh-coloured leotard would give us the reference for the light direction.
So did you have to go reshoot those scenes with the proper motion capture suit on, with like reference points and everything?
Eventually we did, but we didn't even think we'd be doing that. We thought they'd be animated at the very beginning. Animators would copy what Andy was doing on set in his flesh-coloured leotard and just animate them. But then during the course of the filming, we explored the idea of motion capture, which was new to us as a visual effects company. And we figured out that and we did experiments and tests, and Andy was involved in all that stuff, really pioneering the idea of being able to perform as a motion capture character. And then that did result in us having to redo all of Andy's scenes during post-production. He had to come back to New Zealand, or stay in New Zealand. Everyone else had gone home, and he had to recreate what he'd done a year earlier on location, and this time just in a studio with a motion capture suit. But and later on, towards the end, we also did some motion capture on set, didn't we, Andy? We did a lot more of that, obviously, in The Hobbit, but for Lord of the Rings, we just dipped our toes into that towards the end.
Oh, and that flesh-coloured leotard, Andy. Oh. if you've got a spare photograph, I promised you I would put it on.
Actually,
nothing and everything to the imagination.
I know that Ian was forever wanting to borrow it for the weekends, and we said no, the dry cleaning bill would just be too expensive.
So let's talk about the characters themselves. How important is a backstory to a character who is immortal, has always been here, will always be here, and happens to presently be caught in the body of an old man? How much backstory can you bring to a Gandalf?
I don't think you can play that. What you can play is what he appears to be, and he appears to be a bit of a tramp, doesn't he? A man of the road, independent, meddling, vivacious, gregarious, but very human. What he is inside, or what he has been in the past, I really didn't think about it. It was just moment to moment, and I love the fact that this eccentric but real human being was actually immortal and 7,000 years old. But you can't play that. I can't imagine. I did remember asking Peter about the hat one day, because I was very bothered that the little pack that they gave Gandalf to carry would have had all everything he needed in life in it. His pajamas. I suppose he slept in pajamas. Golly, when did he wash? when did he obviously didn't shave, but he must have cleaned his teeth. And I suggested to Peter that actually everything that Gandalf needed was kept inside his hat, and it was a magic hat.
Right.
And his dinner was in there, his breakfast was in there, his mail, everything, but that didn't come about. So no, I just went for the reality of the guy, and based the voice on Tolkien's own voice. There's a recording, I've not heard it for a long time now, of Tolkien actually reading a little bit of Lord of the Rings.
That's interesting, because when I was 13, I've been an obsessive fan for a long time. I got is it Caedmon, is that how you say it, or the Caedmon recording
yes,
of Tolkien? He's almost unintelligible to my ears when he's just talking as himself. It's very Oxford Don, like it's very Humphrey.
Yes, he is, but and a pipe smoker, of course. He's probably talking to a pipe like that. His teeth are probably back. But yeah, and he's obviously a great talker, and doesn't like the sound of his own voice, but he likes communicating, and obviously Gandalf is such a person as well. It's difficult to imagine Gandalf ever on his own, really, isn't it? He's always with people, and he's the guy in the corner of the pub who you want to go and sit next to and reminisce and hear his stories. That's the sort of tone of voice that I got from Tolkien, and of course quite middle class or upper class even, posh, we'd say in UK, and an academic, of course. I've got him here actually. Here we are, there's Gandalf, but of course I was lucky because I played two Gandalfs. They get on very well with each other, no boy.
Well, Andy, what about approaching Smeagol Gollum? Smeagol and Gollum, if you'll see from my bookshelf, Smeagol here, Gollum there. How do you first approach a character who has such a bifurcation?
Well, I was lucky in the fact that I was able to play my backstory. I mean, I actually got to enact the whole journey, really, from being affected by the ring, as Smeagol becoming Gollum, and that was an amazing few days. And again, that was something that evolved during the shoot, because originally I wasn't slated to play the younger version of Gollum, Smeagol before he became Gollum, and then that sort of evolved, and so I actually had a chance to, and that was an amazing few days, kind of getting that transformation right. But the other thing was, it was based on, I wanted to find something that was very tangible and real and felt kind of emotionally truthful, and the notion of addiction, really, I suppose, was what was the addiction to the ring, the power of the ring, that other thing that holds you in its control, has control over you. And so once I found that the physical kind of wretchedness of the character, and the physicality and all of that just sort of came from a notion of being controlled by this other very powerful force, like an addiction. So yeah, and then it was just a matter of sort of going from that very early version of the voice, sort of expanding it, and then working with Pete and Fran and Philippa, and as Pete was saying earlier, the scene where you see very clearly both sides of the personality. We really experimented during the filming of that, and I found those two voices, and it's just, but it was, again, going back to what Pete was saying, the whole thing felt very, very organic. I mean, I do remember spending a long time before shooting, crawling around on all fours, trying to find, and like going for long walks on all fours, and being stopped by people going, "You're mad."
Was this in Wellington? This was in Wellington.
This was actually in Breaker Bay in Wellington. Yeah. Going for long walks by myself on all fours, but anyway.
Why would that seem strange? I don't know.
No.
Yeah. and Andy, I remember, how we talked about that the Smeagol and Gollum, scene in the camp that was directed by Fran. I remember another scene that had a similar origin, that we decided that we should show the moment, and this was all made up while we were shooting. This was concocted while we were shooting is we should show the moment where Schmiegel murders his cousin Deagle in the boat. You know, where they're fishing in the boat, and so you get to sort of play him as a stork, or as a sort of a more.
That's right.
Human, and I remember on that was going to be directed by Fran as well, because she'd done so well with the other scenes, except she woke up that morning with a migraine. I was shooting something else, so we had a second unit to do the scene with Andy, and Fran just said, I can't direct this, I've got this terrible migraine. So Andy and a crew had already arrived on location. They were about 30 or 40 miles away, and I had to call Andy and say, look, your director isn't going to show up. Could you direct the scene for us? And so Andy got to direct that scene because Fran couldn't make it with her migraine. So that was how sort of organic everything was. It was kind of fun, you know. And he did a great job.
For each of you, what was your favorite day to shoot? In other words, a favorite scene to shoot, and what's your favorite shoot? What's your favorite scene that you're in, both of the actors, and then I'll get to Pete. Ian, favorite day to shoot or favorite moment in the movie?
Oh, the first day. It's not often you're on a movie and the first scene that you shoot is your actual first scene. So it's Gandalf sitting in the cart with Elijah and driving into Hobbiton with a pony and trap. You know the picture. I mean, I think it's a famous John Howe painting, isn't it? Or was it Alan Lee, Peter? John Howe. And you reproduce that. And there were all these flowers and vegetables which had been planted a year before, so they were in bloom in time to be shot. And arriving, makes you quite tearful, really. There you are, you're in Hobbiton. You really are there, and there are the round doors leading into the holes that eventually will enter, not in situ, but in the studio later. But that was the first day. The only trouble was it's a bit windy, and the pony was getting a move on, and there was a bit of a breeze going, and it caught the hat, and we couldn't keep the pointy hat on. Eventually, a bit of elastic was brought to play, but no, that was my favourite scene. Also favourite because I didn't have to say anything. That's the best thing in a movie, when you just have to be, you know, you're just there, and you look around at Hobbiton and think, well, is there anywhere else I'd rather be now? No.
How about you, Andy?
Oh gosh, I think one of my favourite days is actually down the South Island filming the What's Tater's precious scene with Elijah and Sean, and having to eat a rabbit that had been eat a rabbit that had it had rubber inside it, so I could kind of pull against it, and then I remember I had a line and I ended up spitting at the end of the line, and I remember thinking, so spit is the only part of me that is actually in this movie. that little bit of spit I was very proud of, and they came out and they just kept it in and built kind of the facial expressions around my spit.
We have a couple of questions from people from Twitter. One of them is, if Gollum was essentially a hobbit, how come he doesn't know what a potato is?
Well, they don't. These are store hobbit. River folk don't really have much to do with potatoes. They're fish people.
Peter,
one must have been a very Hobbiton thing.
I think so.
They weren't, by the Anduin River, didn't obviously know what potatoes were. I think it's
that in pipeweed, I suppose.
Yeah.
Will you ever release the Faramir and Eowyn wedding footage? And does it exist? I didn't know about it until this question came in.
Is that a question for me?
Yes.
Did we shoot? We did it. Oh my God! Did we shoot a wedding scene? Well, I think we might have done. I'm only just remembering it now, so I can't say whether it'll ever be released. I mean, sure, and it will exist. I mean, the trouble with the Lord of the Rings and these sorts of scenes that we shot is that we shot 7 million feet of film on 35mm negative. And at the end of the production, it was all in New Zealand as we were shooting, we were storing here. At the end of the production, we had to hand it over to Warner's, because it's their film, it belongs to them. It was shipped to America, and Warner Brothers apparently I've been told, have got a vault somewhere in the Midwest and inside some mountain somewhere. And so the 7 million feet of film where that wedding scene would be sitting in perfect condition is in the middle of a mountain in the Midwest. And so just the process of convincing Warner's it's just the sheer logistics of us getting our hands on the footage and doing it is tricky. And we've talked about it with Warner's a couple of times. Yeah, we'd love to scan it all now and scan it all at high resolution, the original footage. And
Stephen, could I ask Peter a question?
Of course.
So is there ever going to be a Lord of the Rings or Middle-earth experience that people can go and visit? I don't just mean to go to Hobbiton, which I know is there, and I know New Zealand is there. That's a Middle-earth of sorts, but is there ever going to be a place where you can go and spend the day and go and visit all the locations reproduced?
Even like a theme parky thing, like the Harry Potter.
Theme park, yeah.
They're over the years, and it's been 20 years now, once or twice there's been conversations about Warner Brothers possibly building a park here and a park there, and they might want a Middle-earth section of the park, but it's never come to anything. So I wouldn't say never, because Warner's have obviously, mentioned it to us a couple of times. So it maybe it will one day. I don't. It's really up to Warner's, because not only do they have to do the Middle-earth experience, I think they have to build the park somewhere. The entire park has to be built that would accommodate it, and so that's really whether that ever happens.
Well, Peter, I know things that you have from the set. You've taken me to your storage rooms where you've got like the bigatures and things like that, and I've seen bits of Gondor that you've got built places. But I'm wondering about the actors. Did you take anything from the set? Is there a particular prop or anything that you've kept with you? A memento from the time?
Well, let me have
a little Durin's gold, a little bit of Smaug's treasure.
I believe you got a couple of these, have you, Steve?
I do, Mellon, I do.
That's where that one went. I was wondering where that coin went.
Look here what I've got these. These are my favourite things.
Oh, right, yeah.
You see, a little knife and a big knife, a big fork and a little fork. So if you're playing Gandalf, you have the little fork, so you look big. And if you're playing a hobbit, you have the big fork, so
I have some cutlery too. This is one, if I've got this right, Peter, this is one of the 4 hero stings from the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And I eventually had to pry it away from my boys because they were using it to fight with the Anduril I got from Vigo back there. I said, give me that. Give me that damn thing. It's worth more than this house.
Well, I've got a couple of things to show you. First of all, this guy who Pete and Fran very kindly gave to me, one of the sculpts, the early sculpts actually. This was an early version. Wow. Which I have, but it just means that we can go to each other, golden precious. Yes, we can. So I can do that to us.
What's interesting with that, Andy, because we as Andy was performing, on set, as we talked about, the visual effects crew and team were designing Gollum, so ultimately, that's who we'd be seeing in the film, and that thing, that bust that Andy's holding there. That's an early Gollum, because what we decided to do, rather sensibly, it was sort of obvious really, but it took us a while to figure it out, is to make Gollum's face more like Andy Serkis. Because Andy's expressions that he was doing, in order for Gollum to capture those expressions, he had to have a face that looks a lot more like Andy's than what was on that bust. And so we redesigned Gollum's face to actually be a sort of a caricature of Andy. That was... That all happened, as things were the evolving process of figuring it all out. So that's a pre-Andy Serkis bust. That's one that hadn't been Andy-fied.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. This is such a pleasure for me, and I know for everybody out there watching this, hopefully live in the theater right now. But that's a wrap on the last of our 3 conversations with the cast and creator of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Thanks to Andy, Ian, and Peter tonight. Thank you to everyone watching from theaters around the world and everyone working at those theaters who are doing everything possible to give you a safe and comfortable experience. I hope we can all be together again soon. Gentlemen, Ian, Andy, Peter, thanks so much. What a pleasure.
Thank you, Steve. Great to see you all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen.
Stay safe.